it's nice to see so many students, both from the law school and the business school. And just to give you some background, my focus, I'm a corporate lawyer practicing in Boston, but I chair the South Asia practice group for a law firm. And my focus on this talk will really be taking off from where my last speaker left off, which, she brought it back to Indo-US relationships. And that's what I want to start with, since it's a Yale Global General School conference. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why the Indo-US relationships on a business level has become so important in the last few years, and sort of a bit of the reasons around that. And then talk a little bit about the cross-border M&A activity, what we're seeing, and from a practitioner's point of view, what kind of deals are we seeing? So that should be of interest to all of you in terms of seeing trends. And then if you have some time, I want to focus on something that we've actually not talked a lot about in this conference, which is about cultural issues underlying negotiations. Because I think one of the things that really underpins business in general is culture. And one of the unique features of Indo-US, when you look at mergers and acquisitions, the negotiations and how that takes place, is really understanding and being sensitive to Indian culture, both from the point of view of US companies acquiring Indian companies, but also Indian companies who are doing business in the US, to understand the US style of negotiations and expectations. A lot of deals fall by the wayside because people don't understand each other. And then I actually want to talk a little bit about future trends, but if we have some time, I want to talk a little bit about private equity and venture capital, because I think there are two other categories of investments that are very, very key right now. So I'm going to skip through and actually go quite fast through a lot of the initial parts in order to cover some of the more interesting areas later. So to start up, I think this is all basics, but I will start with the basics, saying that US is the world's largest economy. India is the fourth largest economy right now. But for most American companies, what's really attracting them to India is the fact that suddenly it's dawned on them that India is going to overtake Japan between 2012 and 2014 to become the third largest economy after China. India's population is 1 billion, and the fact, which is more important from an American perspective, is again realizing that it's the youngest demography. So 17% of the working population in the world now is Indian. So this is what Nandan Nilekani calls the demographic dividend that everyone's very excited about. Common democratic system, common language, English, which is again a differentiating factor from China, and a common legal system based on the British common law system. And the India-US engagement, it has been the best it has ever been at an economic, political, and strategic level. You saw the signing of the India-US nuclear treaty after civil nuclear treaty after many years. President Obama's administration has more Indian Americans than any other Indian administration. So if you look at Anish Chopra, Chief Technology Officer, is an Indian American. Vivek Kundra, Chief Information Officer. Sonal Shah, Head of Innovation. So the fact is that, and I think part of this comes from some of the migration patterns we were talking about earlier, just to tie that in. But initially, a lot of the waves of doctors and engineers who went were not very politically active. What happened in the 1990s with the rise of the IT revolution, and Indian Americans, because they made so much money, really came on the map of the business community, and they've been very active. And I think you see that political activism actually being translated now into some kind of gains, because you see President Obama actually hosting the Indian Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh. That was the first official state visit, and it was really a key message that they sent, that India is now very much on their agenda. And also it's seen in many ways, what Amit had referred to earlier, was it's seen almost, it's not an India or China, but it's also seen as a hedge to China. So politically, economically, I think the Indian American community has become much more active. So the diaspora politics are actually playing into how the business relationships are evolving. Coming into the India story, just to give the backdrop, and I think all these are very, very things that we've talked about in the last day, opening up of markets, a tech-savvy young population. The entire class of people sitting here grew up, all of you grew up with cell phones and computers and technology. Cultural changes, again, in India, this fear of failure being replaced by the urge to succeed. Celebrities now in India, the successful business leaders are not the politicians. And hereditary management being replaced by professionals. So all of these changing factors on the ground in India, again, is very interesting, because when you see Indian companies now going into the US, I mean, you'll see this cultural dynamic, and I'll come back to this when we talk about the cultural implications. Then we have, in terms of migration patterns, we have many more people working in software in Silicon Valley, and as many people, or more probably working in Bangalore and in India, and moving up the food and value chain. And if you're a non-resident Indian at this point, with the economy in depression in the US, it's far more attractive to come back to India. And actually, you have a lot of NRIs now coming back. So you have what you call the brain gain syndrome instead of the brain drain. And interestingly, just last month, they had a big jobs fair in New York City, which was Indian companies recruiting in the US. And that was oversubscribed by 5 times, because they're not only Indian Americans coming back, also Americans lining up for jobs to come to India. So that's, again, another interesting part. So you have US trained youth. So people, I think what's really important from your perspective, sitting at Global General School, that that the range of information, the kind of exposure you're getting to international speakers and everything is putting you in a very good position for your place in the global economy, because those are the valued skill sets. It's not just learning about Indian law or Indian business, but actually understanding the mindset of people doing businesses in economies across the world, and in particular, I'm focusing on the US. Why India? I mean, for Americans, it's a wake-up call. They've suddenly realized that 47 companies in Forbes Global List 2000 list are Indian. 100 plus Indian companies have market cap of 1 billion and over. In terms of foreign direct investment, I think a lot of speakers have talked about this, but just in terms of statistics, the FDI inflows received by India in 9 years, from April 2000 to March 2009, was US dollar 89.8 billion. And in just the first, from April to December 2009, it was US dollar 20 billion. So if you see the numbers and compare them, it's definitely gone up by a huge exponential amount. I'm going to skip through these. Cross-border M&A activity, and this is something Amit talked about, but again, to give you a sense of the numbers, January to July 2010, Indian companies acquired 23 US companies with a cumulative transactional value of 3.8 billion. And this is double the deal volume and 8 times the deal value compared with the same 6-month period in 2009. And most of this is, again, going back to some of the speakers, it's IT-enabled services, about 65%. But you have other things like oil and gas and mining, which is about 9%, and pharmaceuticals, finance, and media accounting for the rest. So, and I think this is a really interesting phenomenon, because I think Americans were very, they know of Tatas and Reliances and the big companies. But now what we're seeing is really, and which is an interesting trend, is seeing the medium-sized companies stepping into the global economy. And for example, some of the deals I've been doing lately are publicly listed Indian companies that are now acquiring US companies, usually a lot of them out of bankruptcy court, because those are cheap companies that they can acquire. And it's interesting because in bankruptcy court proceedings, one of the questions that always comes up is, are they going to fire all the workers and send all the jobs back to India? And that's going back to the outsourcing point, and that's a phenomena we see. Actually, a lot of US companies have now realized that it's actually cheaper to manufacture in India. So they're shipping back all the manufacturing to India, because to be more competitive in the US market, so they can manufacture it cheaper, ship it back, manufacture in India, ship it back to the US, be more competitive. But also they want to get into the Indian domestic market. So. And in terms of, you have mid-sized companies, big companies, and focus on natural resources is the big one, because India needs more and more natural resources. So the Reliance Industries acquisition of shale gas assets of Atlas was a big deal this year. Then in terms of M&A deals in India, you have actually a deal value in India has reached a record high of 44.2 billion. And we're seeing a lot of these companies, so you've all heard of the Bharti Zen deal, the Abbott Labs deal with Piramal. These are all the big deals. And we also see that India is looking at acquisitions in other countries, Africa, Sri Lanka, Australia. So it's Indian companies now actually going out and looking for assets, which again, for global investment banking is very interesting, because all these years you had, Indian companies were never of that big a size. You had Reliance, Tata, big companies, but seeing all these other companies coming up. And the interesting thing about these companies is, and this is going back to the discussion yesterday a little bit, is that the family, this is like the typical mid mid-sized family is a family which was started by the grandfather in Kota, Rajasthan or somewhere. And then the next generation, 4 sons made it national. And now you have the next generation, which is all US trained, Wharton educated, taking it international. And the family, the change in family structure, and this is something we talked about yesterday about corporate governance and how that is shifting from a family to a more professional. And while the shift is slow, this is something all speakers have alluded to, needs to happen to make it much more sort of from a US perspective. Also in terms of disclosure, as we, as lawyers, we're always thinking of disclosure, accounting, transparency, all those things to bring them together. I want to sort of talk a little bit about, we talked about reverse migrations, about operations, and I want to talk a little bit about the private equity, because M&A is usually big and mid-sized companies. What we're seeing also in terms of the foreign direct investment flows into India, a lot of it is private equity funds. So private equity funds usually had India as part of their international portfolio. But now they're setting up separate funds just for India. So that's a lot of through the Mauritius Cayman route. That's the funds coming into India. And what's interesting about them is that they're usually growth equity. So they're all sort of for companies that are operational, that have assets that are going to now get money for the next stage. What's missing a little bit in the Indian piece, and this is where I think having the law school and the business school is kind of interesting, is the whole venture capital industry, which is again a very nascent thing in India, because you have a lot of first generation entrepreneurs, and I think we will see a lot more growth of first generation entrepreneurs coming out from this new generation, because everyone's tech savvy, they have aspirations to be more than just employees. So you have now Mumbai Band of Angels, which is a support system to fund and seed different entrepreneurs and companies. But I think that trend is only going to increase, and I think the debate around innovation and innovation universities that's coming out, because I come from Massachusetts, where in Boston it's one of the perfect ecosystems for venture capital. You have universities like MIT and other BU and Suffolk, Harvard, all these universities, which are producing technology and innovation. And then you have venture capital funds in the same area. And then you also have, along with that, you have lawyers. So you have the three, the services. So you have that perfect syndrome of where you have a lot of seeding of companies. And these are like, for example, Genzyme is a company that was incorporated by my law firm. Then they got in seed funding, Series A funding, through the IPO circle, and then M&A. So the thing is that when you see how these companies, and this is very important because for India, right now all the other speakers have also talked about this, about how we become an outsourcing back office. But at some point, the competitive advantage is really going to be in terms of innovation and coming up with new products, new services, coming up with technology that India actually produces companies like Google and Microsoft, and that should be the goal. And seeing the university systems as a place where there is greater interaction between lawyers and business schools and international, because they're all interlinked, and that's a point an earlier speaker also made, that it's not just one, either the law or the business, but they actually go very well together and how the government steps in. And I just want to use the last few minutes to actually talk about, in terms of negotiations between India and the US, one of the greatest roles you can play as being on the straddle, and all of you on the Global General University have this amazing exposure, and you can really be a translators of the cultural dialogue that needs to happen and that underlies business. And something that Professor Peter Schuck mentioned yesterday, he talked about, the concept of time. I mean, that's in all my deals and in managing expectations of CEOs of US companies, I tell them a few things, and it's time, that in India, how time is valued and how time happens. So for example, if you have an M&A deal and it's supposed to take 3 months in the US, it'll take at least 9 months in India, and you have to mentally be prepared for that. So the value of time is a big one. Then the other things like establishment of trust. So in India, the whole idea of coming in for foreign companies and just doing business doesn't happen instantly. It's very much a process of meeting the promoters, meeting the families, spending a lot of time, because people here will not trust you and do business with you. Business is very much based on intimate relationships and trust. So in America, it's very